Today, I'm going to talk to people who may not feel they belong in their country. I'm going to share a message of hope, and I'm going to tell you places where you might consider moving because I know you can find a place where you do belong. And this is something that I felt for almost my entire life. I never understood, me, born just over the US-Canada border in the US, why that meant I had to be so proudly American. I've never really felt patriotic, not because I wanted to be edgy or be different or be cool. I'm just not really wired that way. I didn't get it. And when I looked around at what my country was doing, both politically, when I looked around at some of the people that I met, growing up and as an early adult, when I looked at their knowledge of the world and I felt a certain carelessness towards the people in the rest of the world, I said, this isn't what I'm about. There are certain things that I will always take from the United States and they will be part of me. I would argue as I've gotten older, I've realized it's more about growing up in Ohio. For all that people, including myself, have made fun of it, the American Midwest is something that is unique. There's a certain humility there. There are certain values that I've taken that I'm glad I have. And yet I was able to adapt those into the Nomad Capitalist lifestyle and realize I'm glad I had those values. I paid my way for when I lived there, as did my parents when I was growing up. And one day was enough. I left many years ago. And I've never looked back. I've gone so far even to give up US citizenship because I didn't want to have that identity holding me back. Quite simply, I felt like I didn't belong. Now, the first thing I'm going to tell you before I get into 4 specific places and ways you can live to perhaps find your sense of belonging in the places that work for a lot of folks is don't think you're going to get a permission slip from your country or from most of your friends. We host Nomad Capitalist Live every year. It's a 4-day event. We have dozens of different speakers. You'll learn a lot, but the knowledge and the entertainment is just part of it. One of the biggest things people come for is the networking. Going to have about 800 people coming up this year. And I'll tell you what, most of the people that I hear from there, they say, I don't meet people like this where I live. They come, in some cases, halfway around the world because they want to find that rare breed that understands that maybe they don't feel they belong and they want to hang out with them en masse. I've had many clients over the years tell me, I can't talk to my friends and family about this. And I'm going to tell you this, if you come from the United States as I did, your government is not going to understand or accept it. The average person who works as a civil servant in a country like the United States, I believe in some positions they are physically not allowed to travel internationally. And so if you live in Asia and you come back, having lived in Asia for many years, they might treat you like some kind of pervert if you pull the wrong card, so to speak. So if you think that everyone's going to give you a supportive pat on the back, you're wrong. What I've learned is, as a minority in pretty much everything that I do, whether it's as a business owner, an employer, or as someone who took the extreme step of distancing himself from his country, you think there's going to be someone there cheering you on. You have to be your own cheerleader, the same you were when you started your business and everyone laughed at you and everyone told you you couldn't do it. And they said, why aren't you at the bar with us? Why don't you just get a job? This is going to be the same. You're going to have to create a sense of belonging from who you are, the values that you hold on to, and the people that you choose to identify with. You're not going to get it where you're from. That's why we have Nomad Capitalist Live, but let's talk about where you can go. One place that I see people increasingly looking at as a region is the Middle East. You're going to see in the next week or so, Live Like a King, Oman. It's our new video on luxury living in a country you probably haven't heard much about, Oman. And I mention that because the Middle East is not just Dubai. Yes, there are certain people who are attracted to Dubai. There's many people who are attracted to Dubai. There's many folks who are from that region who go there because it's a business hub for them and they can do all their business and they fit in. It's a bit more liberal. People who come from other parts of the world, yeah, there's some subcultures of let's just call it gold diggers. There's subcultures of bros that go there. There's a lot of different people who go to Dubai. It's not all those things. You can make Dubai what you want. Certainly there is an image of beautiful, glimmering skyscrapers and luxury malls and people dress well. And yes, there is some pretense in some of it. You've got a lot of the fine stuff. And let's just call it it's new money, right? It's people going, in some cases, to flash. You don't have to go and flash. And yet, people who don't like to flash sometimes tell me I don't feel comfortable there. I think Dubai is Dubai. The UAE is a broader country, obviously has a lot more options. They're building up Ras Al Khaimah, for example. There's going to be a new casino there. Abu Dhabi always had more of an old money vibe. There's other places coming up. So the UAE could be a place that you can go. It's no longer tax-free for your business, 9 times out of 10. But if you want to live somewhere and you want to feel like you can belong, you will have more people from more places in the world and you can build your tribe there. It is not going to be a monoculture. You're going to have to find your tribe within Dubai. And so, if you're single, you're going to have to find the area of the dating scene that suits what you want, right? And everyone in Dubai that I talk to talks about that. So you can find your own, culture within Dubai, your own subset. If you don't like that, then you might want to look at some of the other places in the Middle East. Zubi, a couple of years ago, spoke at Nomad Capitalist Live. He grew up in Saudi Arabia before it became more liberal. He said it was a pretty good life. Now, you're not going to have all the entertainment and dating and all that kind of stuff you'd have in Dubai. But if you like a more conservative life, or if you have a family and you want to raise them conservatively in ultimate safety, Saudi Arabia has a permanent residence option you can get. Lifetime residence. The UAE, obviously where Dubai is, has really opened up with any number of different residence options, golden visas, what have you. These are countries that are relatively straightforward to go into, especially if you're willing to make some kind of investment, buy a property, what have you. But there are other countries in the region, like Oman, and I really hope you watch Live Like a King Oman, that are not on the radar. Again, not a great place to be single. One of the things we had when we were filming it, we were asking pretty much everybody, yeah, don't move here when you're single. All the beautiful women, no, single, no. Get married, then come here. Have a peaceful life. I think we saw one piece of rubbish on the street all day. No joke. Everyone is super kind. Perhaps the kindest people in the world. People aren't talking about politics. People are minding their own business. You're allowed to have privacy there. Privacy is very much encouraged. I mean, the process we had to go through to film this was the most rigorous of any Live Like a King we've ever done, because they really want to make sure not just the places are respected, but that the people are respected. You get to have total privacy. So if you're married and you want to go and spend, I think we estimated probably half the price for a lot of stuff that you'd pay in Dubai, you can have a great life in a place like Oman. We've talked about Bahrain in the past. All these countries have. Oman has a program, buy a property, get a residence permit, 5 or 10 years. We talked about that in that video. Bahrain, same kind of deal. I am liking Oman these days more than I like Bahrain, but Bahrain was always kind of the more liberal place. Dubai has obviously become the most liberal place in the region, but Bahrain, the country, was always live and let live, not as strict as the other countries in the region. People who worked in Qatar, Kuwait, etc., would go to Bahrain to kick back, have a beer, relax. So Bahrain is an option, although I do think Oman is a bigger footprint. It's a little bit more going on, a little bit more luxury is my feeling these days. But you've got an entire region where, guess what? Most of the people are from somewhere else and from many different places, and so you can build your own community. I think one of the things that you want to let go of when you move overseas is the place where you didn't feel like you belong. You might not want to hang out with people like that. I ultimately decided, I want to have some level of native English speakers in my, entourage, if you want to call it that, because you can talk about higher level stuff. When I talk to people who are, friends of mine who are super proficient in English, I will, on rare occasion, use a word they're not familiar with. We may not get into the most deep conversations that I could have with someone from where I'm from. But the beauty of the Middle East is people come from all over the world. You've got people from across the Middle East and the Arabic world. You've got people from Asia. You've got people from different parts of Europe. Particularly in Dubai, all over Western and Eastern Europe, you can pick different people and you can build a truly international crowd. And what I've seen both in hiring and in building friendships is you really can't judge people by the country. No matter where you go, there are good, very worldly Americans. It's not a large segment of the overall US population, but you can find them. Don't dismiss those people, but also don't just hold on to, I'm going to only hang out with Americans. I think the beauty of the Middle East is you have one of the most diverse groups from all around the world. And again, what I found in the lesser known, path less traveled countries, particularly Oman, extremely kind people. The locals will be friends with you, particularly in a place like Oman, because it is not 10% locals and 90% expats like you'd have in Qatar, for example. And so it's much more integrated. They will actually be in your neighborhood. And so you can have friendships with some of the kindest, most open people. I think that if you're coming from the Western world, sure, there are some elements of Islam in the Middle East. I mean, they are Muslim majority countries. And yet, I think that there's a lot more openness than the average person would expect. That's a region you can go to. The second place people go to is Asia, probably a bit more single friendly, without going to some of the extremes that happen in Dubai. You can have more normal relationships. And so I know people who they only live in Asia. And maybe they live my trifecta method. They live in 3 different places, but they're all in Asia because they feel comfortable with the Asian culture. I mean, there's certain ways, particularly if you're a foreigner, that you'll communicate. And so I think we have folks, that's just their vibe. Their vibe is Asia. It's okay to be a foreigner. And yet, in many ways, you'll always be a foreigner. And yet, that's accepted. And so Asia is a place, I chose out of Asia to be in Malaysia. I think people are some of the most educated, some of the most friendly. There's the kind of the British historical culture, so people are, have some worldliness. Some of the people at the higher levels, they go and study in the UK, but then they ultimately pretty much all decide to come back. And so I felt, okay, that's a place that has a certain comfort level. I've called Malaysia the United States of Asia, but only in the good ways, not the bad ways that the US has. And if you're going to live in Asia, you want to understand the culture, which includes things like saving face. I think people, when they first come, they realize, or they think, they think a little bit differently of people than they actually are because they don't realize the culture. There's a bit more of a cultural adaptation than maybe you'd have to make in the Middle East. And yet when you make that, I think you can have a very nice life. And I think there's certain people where they just feel more comfortable there. They feel comfortable kind of distancing themselves. The people I find who like to spend time entirely in Asia, there's a certain element where they float above the culture. Not to say they don't make some local friends, not to say they don't make any efforts to fit in or do fit in, but they realize they will never entirely be local. And they might enjoy that for the lack of politics. Nobody who moves to Asia that I know, or very few, is involved at all in even knowing what the local politics are. They float above it. And their life is happier as a result because it's such a different culture for them. They don't bother to get involved. They don't get involved in some of the nonsense. And I think that if you're coming from, let's say, the US or the UK, there might be enough of a different culture. You can understand it to some extent, but you'll never entirely be part of it. In a way where the Middle East, I think, is perhaps the most understanding of Westerners and most respectful. Asia, people are very respectful, but it's always going to be a little bit different. And for some people, you can belong almost by not belonging, if that makes sense. And so I think that that's one option for folks. The other part of the world that you can move to if you want to fit in more is Latin America. There are certain folks who like Latin America. We have clients who, they run businesses in North America. They like the time zone. But from a cultural perspective, we had a woman who did some work for us once. She wrote the book World Schooling. She is a blonde woman from Utah, and she moved to Mexico. She married a Mexican. She speaks fluent Spanish. And she lived outside of the city. They lived in a suburban environment where their neighbors were mostly Mexican. And she told us a story once of how it took some of her neighbors a year or two to realize that she was from the United States. She said, well, where do you think I was from? He said, I just thought you were Mexican. And I think people underestimate in some of these, particularly larger countries, there are different looks. I mean, Brazil is perhaps the one that's often quoted where anyone can be from Brazil, whether you're, blonde and blue eyes or whether you're very, very dark. I mean, it's a real diverse culture there. Doug Casey talked about that in our interview with him. But there are other countries in Latin America that have that, and you would be surprised. And so therefore, you can fit in. I remember, my sisters are adopted. And when my first sister was adopted, my parents chose to adopt from Russia. Why? We'd like Andrew to have at least one sister that looks like him. And they thought, all right, maybe he could pass as Russian. And apparently I go around the world and people say, are you Russian? Like I was at an event. Most people guessed I was Russian. And so, yeah, my sister and I, we look rather alike. Certainly as kids, we looked very alike. And I think there's something that, people like that. So if you want a place where you're not going to float above, where you're not going to, where you want to get more involved, where there's less transience, certainly in Asia, there's a certain sense of transience. In the Middle East, there may be some sense of transience. And in both of those places, you're not likely to get citizenship. If you want to fit in everything from becoming a citizen of the country to looking like you could be from the country, now, you're going to need to learn the language, obviously with the exception of Brazil. And if you want to count, Belize or some of the Caribbean islands where they speak English, the rest of Latin America and part of the Caribbean speak Spanish. And I think that it's perhaps a culture that for someone who wants to be more culturally integrated, you can get into. There's a honeymoon period when you move somewhere where everything's perfect. And over time, you'll find the place where you accept the things that are imperfect. But I think because you're accepting them, it's better than where you came from, where you're forced to accept it. You know, I've told Americans, Mexico, and I've been saying this since before Trump got elected the first time, Mexico is one of the closest and easiest integrated places to go to, even though there's a different language. They eat a lot of the same foods, and obviously Mexican culture has become very prominent in the U.S. recently. But even before that, I mean, you know, they eat a lot of the same foods. You know, religion's pretty similar. The cultures, people in many ways are similar. The language is different, but if you learn that language, you can pretty easily adapt. And I think that if you choose a culture like that, you will be happy and you'll forgive some of the things that you don't like more easily than if they were thrust on you. Choosing and being intentional is always better than not choosing. And so in these Latin American countries, most of them you can get citizenship. You can be someone who can live there forever. I think the trend in Asia and the Middle East is always that at this point, they want you to stay there. There will be an opportunity, particularly if you have money to invest, there will be an opportunity for you to stay there 10, 20, and more years into the future. I don't think they're going to be kicking you out anytime soon. But in terms of belonging, some people just want to belong in a place where they feel good. And Dubai is an energy. People are working. Things are happening. One guy said it's like New York 100 years ago, I would guess, or London 200 years ago. Things are happening. People want to get ahead. Asia, you know, it's a bit of a different vibe. It's the future. People have different ways. But in Latin America, you can become, you know, more, you know, included. And listen, there may be the potential to do both. You might choose to have two homes, and one is in a beautiful villa like you'll see and live like a king Oman, and you're going to live there for part of the year. And maybe you live there just long enough to take advantage of their very favorable tax policies, but then you go and live in Latin America where you like that. That's always how I felt. And that's the wild card. The fourth place you can live is multiple places. I look out at the world and people say, oh, there's nowhere to go that shares my values. There's nowhere to go that agrees with my politics. There's 252 sovereign countries and territories. There's too many places to go. And that's how I feel. And I'm able to lever up and down based on, hey, I'm really feeling connected with, you know, Colombia this year, or I might find somewhere else in Latin America, and I can spend more time there, and I can build some of those closer connections, and I can work towards, hey, I'm going to learn your language, I'm going to be more integrated, maybe I'll get your citizenship. And I can also spend time in places where I realize, hey, I'll never be one of you, but I respect what you're doing, and I'm glad to be here. Almost as a guest. And there's different feelings. And you can play around with those different places and feelings, and you can figure out which one works for you. And if you have different homes and different residence permits, you can lever those up and down, and over time you can change your mind. I've done that. I've decided certain places don't work for me as well. One place I didn't put in here is Eastern Europe. There's a lot of benefits in Eastern Europe. I think there's a certain freedom. I think there's a geopolitical diversification. I think it's good to have in your portfolio. Do I think you will go as someone who speaks English to Eastern Europe and feel like you belong? Some people will. I think fewer people will than these three different destinations. And so there's a lot of countries to choose from. But the thing to realize, whether you're trying to get geopolitical diversification or political diversification and cover yourself, make sure not all your eggs in one basket. And if you're wanting to have a place where you fit in, you can't just look at the Middle East and say Dubai. You certainly can't look at the Middle East and say Muslim culture, they're all coming to kill you. Watch Live Like a King Oman. Watch the thing that they all say. We love families. We love conservative values. We don't judge people. We let everyone do their own thing. And I think there's a message there that needs to get out. You have a place where you can belong in the world. It may not be a place you've even heard of. That's one thing we help our clients with. I was sitting next to a couple at a wine event I went to a few months ago, and they heard what I did, and they're like, oh yeah, we were thinking of Switzerland. We were thinking of Cyprus. I said, yeah, I'm not sure if those work for you, given what you just told me, but I can promise you there's probably a dozen other options that do, and you may have never heard of those. So you can go with the name brand that everyone else is talking about, and that lawyer in Switzerland wants to sell you, or you can go out and explore some of these places. I've liked to stay off the radar, and I felt more like I belonged by going to fewer places where everyone else goes. I feel like I belong more in Kuala Lumpur than in Bangkok, where there's a lot of people who are expats, maybe different kinds of expats than I am, but I wanted less of that in my life, and that's created a greater sense of belonging. The place where you might have the belonging involves you going out and checking out different places that may not be on the beaten path, and probably working with someone like Nomad Capitalist that can go through all the many options and actually hear what you're looking for and go beyond the most popular ones to put together a plan for you. But I will tell you this, it's been a journey for many years for me. And every year I feel like I belong a bit more. And I don't think there's some beautiful one thing you can do that solves the problem that I don't feel like I belong, but I know you can take steps towards feeling like you belong more. And I think those are the places where I would start.
This is Oman, and today we're showing you luxury living in its beautiful capital city of Muscat. Now we're going to show you one of the sexiest luxury villas here in Oman.
We're going to show you how to live like a king